Thank you all so much for joining us today. I was looking through the list as I always do before these webinars. We see sort of a broad range of people. So if you're joining at 7 in the morning or 10 p.m. at night, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. My name is Xander Willoughby. I'm really excited as always to be your host today. Today's ConnexUs Thursday talk is on behavioral change techniques for preventing crime and violence. So we have two really great speakers today. I'll hand the floor to them for a presentation. At the end, we'll have about 20 to 30 minutes of discussion, Q&A. A lot of the presentation will either overlap with work that you do, interests that you have. So we're excited to hear from everyone's experience, hear questions that you have, especially from so many contexts and from multiple different sectors. And so to be able to sort of share lessons learned, talk about different challenges that we're all facing in our work, things like that. Another big thank you to Nonviolent Peace Force Indonesia for lending their office and solid internet today. Apologies in advance if it drops out a little bit, but a big thank you to them for sharing their space. Without further ado, we have Ana Maria and Jonathan with us today. I'll let you introduce yourselves, dive into the policy insight. We're just really thankful to have both of you, and I'll leave it there and hand it to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Xander. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Really excited to talk about this insight and some of the emerging evidence. And really exciting to hear that there's so many people from so many different contexts and backgrounds. I think this will be particularly applicable since it's coming from so many different contexts. But a little bit about myself. I'm a senior policy associate at JPAL Global, and I'm really excited to be joined by Johnson Bohr, founder and CEO of Network for Empowerment and Progressive Initiative. We'll be talking a little bit about one of the programs that is cited in this insight and giving firsthand account of implementation and how evidence has been really key in the design and running of this program. So with that, I will jump in and share a little bit about JPAL first, just in case anyone here is not familiar. We're a research center based at MIT, but we have regional offices and a network of affiliated researchers across most continents, and we really focus on randomized evaluation of social programs and policies across a range of topics, and including crime, violence, and conflict. So at JPAL, we really work to answer some of the most pressing societal questions by mostly connecting the dots from research to action. And this mostly involves, one, supporting policy-oriented randomized evaluation, two, sharing the lessons from these evaluations with policymakers and working with them to help adapt them to their local context. And then three, helping build capacity of researchers and policymakers to conduct and use randomized evaluation in their contexts. The Crime and Violence Initiative, the little piece of JPAL that I work on specifically, is one of a number of funds that supports specifically research on preventing, mitigating, and responding to the effects of crime and violence. I know it's kind of broad, so here on the screen are a couple of the key research themes that we specifically focus on. And then I just wanted to kind of plug among some of the broader activities that I mentioned in the previous slide, our matchmaking process. It's a process in which we connect implementing organizations interested in evaluating their program with researchers in our network who can help them with just that, evaluating that program. And I think that could potentially be of interest to some of us in the audience. So if anyone is interested, we're also running a request for a proposal coming up soon, which will open up funding for these types of evaluations. So it's a particularly good time to be reaching out to us if that's something you're thinking about. And even if you're not exactly sure if your program is right for evaluation, we're always happy to chat and get to know more organizations that are working in this space. So there's our email on the screen, and it'll pop up again later as well. So now jumping into the policy insight that is focusing on behavior change intervention for crime prevention. But before I start, I just want to quickly highlight or define policy insight, because I know I'll probably say it a few times and it's a very JPAL term. It's essentially just a policy product that highlights lessons from a body of evidence that's emerging across multiple studies. So this insight draws on findings from 8 experimental and quasi-experimental evaluations of behavior change interventions designed to reduce criminal, violent, and antisocial behaviors across a range of contexts, including Canada, El Salvador, Liberia, and the US, and across a range of populations, including in-school youth, young adults, older adults with a violent history, and police. The insight is framed specifically around behavior change techniques, as many of the interventions draw from a broad behavioral science literature on techniques aimed to help individuals think more systematically about the situation they're in, rethink their default assumptions, and consider alternative perspectives, change their emotional regulation, or plan ahead by setting goals, all of which can help curb violent and self-destructive tendencies. Some of this draws on principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which we call it in the insight where it's relevant, but it's worth noting that none of these programs actually implement CBT in its clinical sense, and all the interventions vary in terms of exact curriculum content, length, format, etc. So the insight is not looking at one intervention that's been replicated across several contexts, but rather interventions that have all been designed to change how people think about themselves or their situations to help reduce these outcomes of crime and violence. So I'll jump into several of the key takeaways from this insight, but I think broadly, what you should really take away from the insight, one of our main lessons that we found across these studies, is that crime and violence prevention programs that draw on behavior change techniques to address cognitive biases in decision making have been effective in reducing criminal, violent, and antisocial behavior. And this is really encouraging as it highlights a promising and innovative approach that could potentially replace or at least complement more of the traditional methods that are looking to reduce these. So diving into this a bit further, we see that in high crime and high violence settings, implementing interventions that build on these components of CBT principles, participants have been less likely to engage in crime and antisocial behaviors. One example is in high crime neighborhoods in Monrovia, an 8-week CBT curriculum led to persistent decreases in criminal and violent behavior. This is actually the program that Johnson will tell us a little bit more about later in this discussion. So I'll save further details on the program and the really promising results for him to share. But based in part on this study and these promising results, researchers and implementers in Chicago actually designed the Rapid Employment and Development Initiative, or READY, a program that combines subsidized employment, professional development, group-based CBT for a group of men at the highest risk of being involved in gun violence in this population. They found suggestive evidence the program READY reduced arrests for shootings and homicides, and participants who were referred to the program by outreach workers saw a reduction in involvement in serious violence, mostly driven by reductions in arrests and victimizations for shootings and homicides. So this kind of points to some of the need for targeting that I'll talk a little bit about later. While there's still some debate over precise mechanisms driving these reductions, where studies have been able to isolate and test for mechanisms, evidence suggests that these interventions may have helped participants reduce their automatic thinking, slow down their decision-making process, improve their emotional regulation, and consider alternative perspectives. So, like I just mentioned, a second main takeaway from these studies is that in some cases, interventions demonstrated the strongest impacts among the most antisocial individuals, suggesting that targeting is essential. For example, in the program in Liberia that Johnson will tell us a little bit more about, reductions in crime and violence was greatest among men who reported the highest level of antisocial behavior before the program began. And then in Chicago, the program targeted only about 0.1% of the city's population, but the researchers still estimated it saved society between 711 million to 3.6 billion based on reductions in arrests and victimizations for shootings and homicides. This really indicates that programs don't necessarily have to have this massive reach to have a positive impact on community violence. However, the main challenge here is identifying and reaching those who may have been at the highest risk of these behaviors. But we've seen that working with implementers deeply ingrained in the community can really help on this point. We've also seen that since a lot of these evaluations, or a few of these evaluations at least, were conducted in school setting, and they can offer valuable insight into the positive effects on educational outcomes as well. For example, in El Salvador, an after-school program targeted to students aged 10 to 16 that addressed socio-emotional skills, conflict management, and violence awareness was able to reduce violent behaviors in the classroom but was also able to improve educational outcomes by increasing attendance and improving math and science scores. And then similarly in Chicago, a program for male students from 7th to 10th grade that included weekly sessions reduced arrests during the program and again was able to improve educational outcomes by increasing graduation rate by 12 to 19%. And these are just some examples of how this approach can be applied not only to target crime and violence outcomes, but can have impact in other aspects as well. So for this fourth key takeaway, I'm going to talk about one of these programs that was designed for police officers. I think it's important to highlight that this population is quite different from the populations of the other studies I've mentioned, and really emphasizes that this approach has promised to be effective across a variety of populations. So this police training, situational decision making, or SIT-D, was a program implemented in Chicago aimed to help officers think more systematically in ambiguous and high-stress situations that they can typically find themselves in. Some of the key results researchers found included that trained officers reduced the use of non-lethal force and discretionary arrest, and they reduced arrests of Black civilians, suggesting that it reduced racial disparities. In a series of simulations, researchers also found that trained officers were more likely to come up with more varied explanations for someone's behavior in a criminal scenario, and were more likely to update their assessments of a situation as those situations changed. This suggests that they relied less on default assumptions and were better able to fully consider different potential interpretations of a situations that they were encountering. Again, these promising results on a population that not the typical population of these of some of these programs that we've been discussing is promising evidence that this approach can be applicable across different contexts. There's even ongoing work in Mexico City that's also looking at the effect of these types of intervention as a police training and support tool. So in this last takeaway, I'll quickly discuss cost effectiveness, which of course is really important when thinking about implementing these types of programs. The majority of the programs reviewed in this insight involved low cost interventions with relatively simple and standardized curricula that was often delivered by facilitators with no formal training in social work or psychology, suggesting that these approaches could be replicated across a variety of contexts. So looking at this chart, if you look down at Ready, which is clearly one of the more expensive programs, it still had estimated benefits that highly outweigh these program costs. So given the high cost that violent behaviors impose on societies, these findings suggest that even expensive programs, this one, can be worthwhile investments when targeted appropriately. And I'll just end with, well, these studies featured in the insight are specifically looking at crime violence indicators. There's a lot of work looking into how these approaches can lead to positive changes across a range of themes like intimate partner violence, mental health, economic well-being, and like I mentioned earlier, education. And with that, I will pass it over to Johnson to tell us a little bit about style.
Thank you very much. So to start, I will provide some context on the program and the study that actually serve as the baseline for this. I will try to be somehow brief, but I'm happy to answer questions as well. The program actually took place between 2009 and 2012. It was about like 6 years after the last Civil War, or after the Second Civil War in Liberia. This war actually resulted in significant casualty, which mobilized a significant portion of the population into violence. And even after the return to peacetime, the country economy was struggling, and young men had few, employment opportunity, with some turning to criminal behavior. The study also focused on men aged 18 to 35 who had spent something like 15 years of their childhood into the Civil War. After a DER program, which is the disarmament, demobilization, and rehabilitation process that were organized by the UN peacekeeping force in Liberia. But about 38% were former member of the group, Norway armed group, the MPFL, and the JK, and Model as well. So 38% were actually former member of armed group, and 1/4 were homeless. Given the fact that there were already high-risk youth in the streets of Monrovia before the war, this war actually increased that. And with their daily activities, they actually earn about 7 months as an average income while they run the street. And They were actually recruited because they were considered at the higher rates for criminal or violent behavior, ranging from street fighting, snatching phone, drugs dealing, crime, and robbery as well. And the government was also worried that they could be mobilized into election violence. There's some of the cases that happen in our neighboring Ivory Coast of Sierra Leone as well, involving them into rioting and rebellion in those circumstances. And I was also one of those youth that lost their childhood to this 14 years of civil war. So in that context, the Network for Empowerment and Progressive Initiative has already been created or established and have been involved into some psychosocial related work, social integration, work in Liberia. After the founder or the last disarmament process, which actually ended the civil war, NEPI decided to redesign its strategy in engaging youth because the DDR process actually resulted into allowing a lot of the youth into the street corners of Monrovia, because those that did skills and had tools to actually establish their own kind of businesses within the community did not materialize because most of those tools were sold. And a lot of these guys actually trying to. And at that time, Google Zawu, Zelen Kwaluba, Nelson George, and myself has funded this institution and were also part of the second phase of the DDR program, where we were able to demobilize 30,000 former combatants at major, cantonment site across the country with our team. So after that, we decided to redesign the program and name the style, the sustainable transformation of youth in Liberia, which actually shows that our program have evolved over several years already before we arrived at that point. And from a couple of speaking engagement in the US, we actually came across research Christopher Blammer, who created interest in this program and was able to get in touch with other researchers to actually study the program and see the kind of success they were having. So they decided to design a randomized control trial. And the program has several goals at that time. Just imagine youth considering themselves to be outcast, given the fact that they knew the norms of the society, but growing in the war, they were conscripted at age 10, 12, and what have you, actually did not feel safe within the community, and they did not also regard the norms of those communities. So our goal at the time will actually focus on a couple of these that has to do with helping men improve their self, control and self-image, and dealing with dealing peacefully with anger and violence, because that was one of the way of their lives after war. They're quick to get angry, and in normal society, not understanding the community they were actually going into and how the community feel about them. These were glaring fights that we were seeing on a day-to-day basis. So we thought that targeting that, the issue of self-identity as member of a mainstream society rather than an outcast was another thing we wanted to see being effective in our program. And they incorporated a variety of different activities. So the entire STAR program comprised of an 8-week therapy session, group therapy session, and pair with care transfer. But within that 8 week, we actually provide therapy 3 days a week and follow up 3 days a week, 3 to 4 hours a day in each of those sessions. So part of our strategy was to actually long-term planning exercises, because these were things that these guys were not used to doing. They are always anxious to actually do things and not planning properly. And getting prepared for a mainstream society requires proper planning to be able to execute your daily activities, medium, long-term, plan as well. So we encourage role play to practice some of these non-aggressive behavior, because there were activities that we actually find involved with during our session that could trigger their anger, and we wanted to see how they manage them at that point while they are intrigued. So some of those ministry activities were like visiting grocery stores, supermarket, visiting GSM company and bank, community social club, which is our community local bank system where you can save money and then be able to borrow from those institutions to actually get involved into other businesses. Those are places that we expose these guys so that they know that there are other capitals in the community that they can actually, target to get funding from that will help them live the life that they need to live in normal society. So we practice a lot of these, and there were other homework to practice some of these tasks as well. So the one we follow up were on those days where we don't have group sessions to follow up on these guys and have one-on-one counseling with them, follow up some of the behavior we saw being portrayed in the center, in the training center, and some of the assignment being given. We also wanted to know why people did what they or fell behind or how they managed to overcome them. All of these sessions can be discussed in our one-on-one follow-up. So the evaluation have 4 arms. One group received just the therapy program, another group received a cash transfer of $200, and another group received both. And the last group was actually the control group. But how did we arrive at that? When the initial recruitment was done with this high-risk group, we took them to a church-related compound, and where these guys were able to get involved into playing a big to make themselves into the program. So we had a treatment group and a control group in the laboratory. After the 8-week program, 2 weeks after the 8-week program ended, we brought them back together as one unit or one group, and then allowed them to also play lottery for the 200 cash pin. So after that lottery was played, which allowed a participant to actually choose a card from an open bag that allowed them to win a $200. Those performances were done. Those that took the card out of the open bag that gave them the $200 came from both control and treatment group. But after that exercise, they actually broke the participant into 4 groups. You have group of participants who have gone through the therapy and were able to get cash from the road. You have group of participants actually went therapy but did not get cash. So those were just group that actually got therapy. You also have groups that were able to actually get cash from the lottery but did not actually attend the therapy program. And there were also groups on the control that did not get cash as well. So that broke our group into 4 segments of the entire program, and researchers follow up on this group 1 month, 1 year, and 10 years after through those goals. But after our 10 years follow-up survey, we also found that the impact we had at 1 month and 1 year were still consistent, with a 0.25 standard deviation on an index of antisocial behavior. And this was phenomenal to have high-risk youth involved into a program, actually reducing the level at which they were involved into drug selling, the level at which they were involved into theft, robbery, as well petty crime. And these 10 years impact were remarkably similar to the impact at both the 1 year and 1 month survey that were conducted. This actually gave us that momentum to see that this program can be relaunched in Liberia and still across the continent. And most of them, you read the research results, you will actually see that there are moderate improvement on economic outcomes and the outcomes and business investment at 1 month, but these did not last more than 10 years. Why? Because in Liberia, the tendency was that a lot of these guys were involved into selling drug goods after the government. And they were always found in those crowded areas along the street where police were also asked to dislodge, pedestrians and marketers from those areas. So that led to a lot of them businesses being confiscated from them by police officers and losing some of those investments as well. Those were some of the experiences we had during that time. Next slide. The 10-year result from Liberia suggests that there are high return to targeting, the most violent and most vulnerable young men. And this graph will actually show that there were only a moderate impact on the respondents who baseline level of the antisocial behavior were below center level, with effects driven by those above the 75% level that you actually have been talking about. The program was such a unique program, and it's such a unique program such that the most high-risk youth were impacted by the program than those that were at moderate level. And that gave us that tendency now of redesigning what an instant survey could be like, be able to identify the most high-risk youth at the level of the community. So with the help of JPAM, we're able to develop an intake survey, and that intake survey is what we are now using for recruitment, for the replication of this program in Liberia and across the sub-region as well. And as I speak to you, just a week ago, we were in Nigeria with a design workshop thinking about launching in that part of, Iron area in Africa. So presently, we have built a team from the core of things that we have been using in the past with additional group of people, set in place a research and mail section, because we cannot actually do an RSTT right now in Liberia. So the intent is to develop a monitoring or a mail system that will help us monitor the level of fidelity of the program as we scale across Liberia, and when other nonprofit organizations are implementing, how we can be able to monitor them. So we are using the mail system right now, which is one of the new systems we have developed as a result of the research, including the intake survey using for recruitment. So part of that also has to do with recruiting certain number of groups on the quarterly basis. We run the program. Our class size is 20 participants with 2 facilitators at a time, but we recruit up to 360 across the country to be able to make sure that those communities benefit from our program. So we have 3 centers across the city of Monrovia. And what we usually do as a strategy is that to be able to have those high-risk youth, you actually have to recruit more than needed. So to be able to get 360 participants, sometimes we recruit 920 participants, analyze that to actually see those that are with that higher risk, to be involved in the program or admitted in the program. Next, and thank you very much. But with that, I will just add a little bit with the model. So now we have a model that is very cheap, easy to implement as well, because they have to be cheap for funders to actually pay for it, and it has to be easy for other nonprofit organizations to be able to implement. So the model has to do with recruiting program beneficiaries, conducting CBT, conducting social reintegration activities, and providing cash transfer. So that's the model that the STAR initiative is using right now going forward. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan and Maria. Jonathan, your last line, I think if there's anything that summarizes what people are looking for in these fields, is finding ways to do things cheaper, easier, and more efficiently, or more effectively. I think that sort of summarizes what a lot of discussion that I hear. A little bit of housekeeping before we move into Q&A and discussion. For our audience, this is now where we want to hear from you. If you're implementing programs that are sort of along this theme, or if you have questions for either of our presenters, first, you can put them in the Q&A function that I think is around here on your screen. Second, you can click the raise hand and we can call on you to unmute. I can either read out your questions or call on you to read them out yourself. I did have a quick, maybe it's a harder question. I'm not sure. Question. I think, Johnson, specifically for your program, I'm curious, and then if there's sort of lessons from others that have popped up in the policy insight, I'm curious for both of you. But when we're targeting 18 to 35-year-old, judging that's about a third of sort of the group that I fall in, and about the third of the people that I talk to are sort of in that thing or in that range. And I know very few of them are interested in going to therapy or talk about it sort of openly. So I'm curious about sort of when you pick this group that sort of is in need or could benefit from this sort of intervention, sort of how do you have that conversation to convince people to be willing to participate in the program in the first place? Is it the sort of that possibility to get the either through the lottery or the guaranteed money? And then I'm curious for that third group as well. So if you have any insights, I'm curious.
Definitely. People are always concerned about cash being a driving force for beneficiaries coming to program, but that's not actually the case. Even in the initial pilot, cash was a measurement tool. So participants were not aware that there was going to be a cash transfer at the end of the 8-week therapy. So we recruited them. And that's one reason why we recruit more than expected, because a lot of these guys will actually refuse to leave their everyday hustle, as we call it, running the street and work as the day after going to therapy for 8-week session. They are going to miss on a lot of the things that their friends will be getting in their absence. But it is a situation where people either get into the street as high risk you through peer pressure and they get trapped. And in that situation, you lose your immediate family and extended family, because this is the behavior that is associated with stigma. No family member want to be your friend when you are taught to be a criminal in this. So they had to see the family member, they had to interact with police, and some of these guys are even high school graduates. They see their friends who have progressed to a certain level. So there are some that have already come to a point of regret why they ever found themselves in this kind of a situation and are looking for the opportunity actually for that second chance in life. So you will find that group of people. So when we get in the street, we first do community mapping and understand those environments that we want to work in. We identify stakeholders at those levels, which are community leaders, organization leaders. We meet them, talk to them, and use them as an entry point into those environments. They live in those communities, and they will tell you where these guys congregate on a regular basis. They will tell you the kind of behavioral patterns of these guys, the kind of antisocial behavior they are involved with, because this community, people walk in every day and become victim from these guys' criminal behavior. So they know the kind of activities these guys are involved in. Those community leaders actually usher us to the structure at that level, at that hotspot, as we call it. And in that hotspot, those guys also have leadership. So we need to first start, introduce ourselves, and let them know that we have this kind of a program that the youth can benefit from. And we want to give opportunity to these youth to be a part of this program. When the staff start and check your program, he definitely you the opportunity to talk to the boys, and then you can be able to talk to them, give them some level of sensitization and awareness about the program so that they understand what is needed for them, understand what are the change level that we have in their life. Right there, you will see people responding to you and telling you they really want to be reunited with their family. So if the program can help them get reunited, they will be so appreciated. We provide those information, set date for survey with those rural communities after all of those engagements. That will be the time where we send our team in the field with our tablet and intake survey to conduct those surveys. So when the surveys are conducted, the reason why we need to recruit more than expected, because we want to select you that are presented from this data as the most high rate you. So you can be wanting 360 participants in a cycle, and you recruit 360 participants. We're going to have the right size or the right class size or section size or the total cohort that is needed. So that's how our targeting is. And the intake survey actually help us do that targeting. So it's not like you see somebody from the city or someone who is ready or dead up and you conclude that he's the worst criminal. The intake survey has the capability of telling us different kinds of antisocial behavior that you are involved in, and can be able to tell you the degree at which they are involved from how they answers this question. Yeah. So it's not actually cash. And the also said that when we launched when we did a relaunch, we actually graduated 15 participants from that program. Cash information the community. We expected that the second cohort were going to be overwhelming. But the second cohort, we actually graduated 240. To tell you that people are not coming just because of, with the current information in the community, we expected that participants will be full-time, in training, and there will be multitude of people who are even on the same bar that wanting to be part of the program. But yet, out of the 336 participants, people still fell short of our 18 days attendance protocol to be qualified for cash transfer. So now whether the guys still are coming for transformation.
Really interesting, really helpful. Thank you so much for that. And are there others from the policy insight of sort of, what's the word for it, sort of motivations for participation that sort of come through in the research?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question to think about, especially in this context for anyone that's thinking about implementing or trying to integrate these into their context. And I think Johnson's perspective is exactly what is like really important to consider and might not be as salient in a research paper per se. I think a lot of the studies focus on, and I think it's really important to also consider kind of the incentives of the program participants and working that into the program. So programs that offer this, potential cash benefit, or programs that have like professional development, or, not exactly the age group you're thinking, but when it's applied to children, thinking of fun activities that they will want to also participate in. But like when I was talking about targeting, I think working with outreach workers that are really, really deep into these communities, as Jonathan talked about, is really important in not only finding the participants that are going to get the best benefit out of these programs and create the best benefit for the community level. But I think exactly what Johnson was saying is like these outreach workers are also the closest to the community and can be kind of convincing in themselves and know what the incentive of these participants are and really make that case for them while they're kind of enrolling them.
Thank you. And sort of, go for it.
Just to add to what she's saying, that one kind of advantage that the program has when it comes to facilitator who have that experience and are very close to the community as well. But from the policy perspective, I also see that the dissemination process with land ministry actually works. You got to realize that youth is a cross-cutting issue. To identify ministries who are working in this sector and working closely with them so that they understand the kind of impact you are having, the model that you are using, is a good step in the door, because it's possible that one of these agencies or ministries who adapt the model, as a kind of service, where in bilateral, multilateral funders can be able to serve, as payee to actually make sure that these implementations are done. That is the kind of, dissemination exercises we are carrying on in our government engagement process in Liberia. Right now, as we speak to you, we are one of the lead partners now for the health ministry, because the government just turned the original situation as a kind of public health emergency. And we were contacted to actually help do a lot of awareness at the level of the community for the launch of the government as well. And we are one of the lead partners waiting to see how we can move that forward, just part of our own fundraising to make sure that we can engage this population. So the government engagement strategy is also something very much important to take into consideration.
Definitely. And I think one thing that I'm not sure the best way to phrase this question, but sort of talking about the importance of sort of relational work and deep knowledge and sort of knowing the community and who to go to when you're looking at programs like this. I think in a lot of the fields that the people on the call come from, when you hear randomized control, people get a little afraid. I think I can count the number of, at least for the peace building field, sort of recent, sort of well-known randomized control programs. I'm curious, sort of where should people look? Because I think that sort of that apprehension, and then people say, okay, that's not really a method that I'm going to look into. So I'm curious, like, where should people look on ways to do this sort of ethically is not the word, but sort of in an approachable way? I saw a nod, so I hope that's enough to sort of get you going on answering that.
And I think it's a really fair question. Go ahead, Johnson.
just before honor come in, is that myself from that background, from the peace building background, and with all of the war in Liberia and our engagement with the CPA, I had similar thought. There is a principle that is followed from the peace building side, the principle of non-discrimination, participation. From the peace building side, people feel the threat of running mass control trial because they feel like you are discriminating against beneficiaries that you're supposed to be working with, and you are preventing them from participating. That's why a lot of the practitioners from that background try to shy away from running mass control trial. But it is actually the golden rule. If you are implementing a program, there are other variables within it, the community that might affect your program positively, and you feel that you are the one having those impacts. So if it is not measured through running mass control trial, you cannot distinguish who is specialized in that place.
No, I think Johnson did a great job of kind of capturing the main message, which is, randomized control trials allow us to evaluate programs in a way that really isolates the program and of that program, so that we can know that the impacts and the money that's being spent on those impacts are really having the best effect, or the highest effect. But I think it's a fair question, as I was saying, to have concerns or to think and consider it, because meeting you halfway, randomized control trials aren't necessarily the best method for every single program. There's definitely different considerations to think about. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm always happy to chat with people about their specific program and think through if a randomized evaluation is the best way to evaluate that program. But practically, a couple places that you can start to learn about a little more, because I do think it's a resource that is definitely something people should consider. Our website has so many resources, really communicating all of these concepts in really the most kind of digestible way, so people get an understanding of how to run an RCT, what the benefits are, what ethical considerations there are, and just make a decision if it's really the best way to evaluate this program. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth considering.
Really helpful answers from both of you. I'm going to jump to Maxine.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk and this conversation. So my name is Maxine. I work at Search for Common Ground. I work on our programs in the United States, so to build peace in the US. And I've been toying with this idea. I am personally a big fan of therapy and behavioral health interventions. At the same time, the United States is facing a lot of both individual psychological drivers of conflict and social psychological drivers of conflict. So both at the individual and community levels. And I'm wondering if you've explored what, if any, interventions can be done at the more community level. And I really appreciate what both of you have said about the importance of individual targeting. But I'm wondering if you see any success in kind of working with larger groups, or applying behavioral health techniques to a broader audience, because a lot of these things are happening at the societal level. So that's my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that question. At the community level, we use different kind of approaches in doing similar kind of work. We have been doing psychosocial related work at the community where, in fact, if it is from the conflict background, you will be thinking about the societal level trauma, and you want to make sure that you are setting in place a system that will be able to address members at every level. So you could use trauma-informed practice or trauma healing, like as we call it. But we do that in stages where you recruit participants from certain number of community, bring them to an awareness workshop, take the best from an awareness workshop to a capacity building workshop, and take the best capacity building workshop to a trainers of trainers workshop. And then those people go back to their community to serve as peace ambassadors at that level. That was one approach that was also used in Liberia that was very successful. And besides that, we thought there was a need to actually set in place community peace council. So to set in place community peace council was to actually make sure that the local leaders in those communities can be able to have time to themselves to face the reality of community development and infrastructure why issue of conflict at the level of the community can be handled by the Peace Council. So we also took segment of the community, youth, women group, youth leadership, traditional leaders, the chief, and brought those group of people to train them over a period of time, and allow them to select members from those cross sessions to form a community peace council. And then our peace council, and we provide refresher training for them over time to make sure that they have the tools and skills necessary to address their own conflict situation at the level of the community. We succeeded in setting in place 80 community peace council in one of the counties that really works well. And Chris also evaluated one of those programs on a JPC to also know if the approach of setting in place community peace council or even providing conflict management skills and trauma healing related work in the community can actually have impact on returnees and displaced people. So those method works as well. And some of those methods can also be transferred from the US side, looking at the community and understanding the kind of situation at those communities that you want to address. It can either be through a psychosocial related or social reintegration activity that requires special kind of curriculum that you can use in those activities.
Yeah, I think Johnson covered a lot of really great programs and policies that have been looked at and applied in a conflict setting. In the US, I don't know that anything exactly comes to mind of like a community-based program. And I think, well, if several of these studies have actually been looked at in the US, I think the focus has been on this targeting and the hope that that will lead to community level reductions in violence. I think my best advice or thoughts on this is I know that our North America office that specifically works on the US context is hopefully going to have an initiative soon very focused on criminal activity in the US. So this could be a great topic to engage with them on, and hopefully they'll have some more insights and research on this in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I think we planned this session, I think in mid-May, and I thought all of June about it. I was excited to learn from both of you about this. And so I hope that the rest of you were just as excited to sort of pull in this information as we go. In the chat is the link to both organization websites. In your email, apologies for all the emails this week, making sure that people get to this event. But the link to the policy insight is in that email. If you want to get a hold of either of our speakers, or if you want to host another Thursday talk. We're sort of planning out the fall now, or sorry, September, October, November, for those of you in the Northern Hemisphere. So please get in touch if you want to share some of your work. Do either of you have something that you wanted to work in the conversation that you didn't get a chance? This is the moment to sort of work that in. If not, I'll say my thank yous.
No, just thank you to Andrew. This is a great opportunity to chat. And again, anybody who wants to reach out to either of us, we're happy to chat.
Yeah, definitely. And a follow-up comment, I will be happy to also chat with whoever wanting additional information.
Perfect. Much appreciated.